can start in now. Brilliant. So welcome again, everyone. I hope you had a nice break. So welcome to our panel entitled Reading, quote, Orts, Scraps and Fragments, Voices of Resistance in Between the Acts. So our speakers today are Ana Carolina de Azevedo Guedes, Carla Lento Faria, and Lucas Leite Borba. So just a quick reminder to avoid any feedback effect on the sound, just keep your mics muted. Obviously, apart from in the Q&A, you are very welcome to post any questions you may have in the chat. You don't have to wait for the end of the presentations. During the Q&A, you can also use the raise hand function. Do message me if you are in doubt as to how that is supposed to work. And yeah, so what we're going to do is that I'm going to introduce speakers at the beginning of each of their papers. Then they're going to present for 15 minutes, and then we're going to have just a few minutes break for just everyone to process, and then we'll have our Q&A at the end. So if everyone is happy for me to start, I'll present Anna. So Anna is a PhD in social history of culture from the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro. She's currently researching the work of Virginia Woolf, her mobilizations around Freud's psychoanalytic theories, the thing theory, and the uses of metaphor as a way of writing history. Her research interests include history of literature, history of psychiatry, theory of history and historiography, feminism and its different theories. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marie. And you are listening well?
Yes, we can hear you well.
I will share my screen. All right. I will share in the chat. I share in the chat my speak because my English is a little wretched, and I will pay attention. First, I would like to thank Marie and Paola for the opportunity to present my research at Woolf's conference, and thank my fellow panelists for their attention in this process of organizing. I listed the presentations of Danielle Martini, Marie, and Paola in the some days earlier, and I will comment on my presentation, some of the questions that her presentations brought to me. Music has always been an element present in the Virginia Woolf's life, whether for aesthetic appreciation or for the need to pace a writing that was intended to be inserted in the rhythm of the present. Taking this statement into account, it seems relevant to me to establish and reinforce the composite between poetry and prose in modernism in her works, and a form and as a characteristically Woolfian experimentation. What is conventionally called poetic prose takes place in this middle in which the form of stanzas and verses starts to be constructed in the long form, but with rhythmic elements added to a dive into interiority, making the writing fluid and the aim of approaching the rhythm to the flow of human thoughts. Maurice Blanchot, in The Infinite Conversation, proposes a triggering of memory so that the individual can achieve a poetic dignity, which allows using experience as a separation between what is read and what is experienced, producing an incessant movement between memory and what must be forgotten, and how the composition of an interpretation proper to each reader is formed. By including the memorialistic and poetic dimension, I align myself with the reflection of T.S. Eliot, categorizing poetry through a moral reading. This value judgment confuses his actions between poet and philosopher, words and sense. What experience will be communicated? According to Coleridge, poetry gives more pleasure when it's only generally and not perfectly understood. The reader appears again as a value element within modern writing, establishing a bounding relationship between the three parts of the reading process that demand a sharing between each of them. It can be said that an important part of English prosaic writing, with a strong impulse of the written element, keep the text pleasant to the ears. Abraham Lipinski points out that the English strove not to fall into verse, but to maintain poetic qualities while writing prose. I put insert of the text of Lipinski in the screen. As a starting point, there is an act of talking in which individuals usually remain as relaxed as possible. We measure our words to suit our rhythmic sense, and what we notice is how this way of dealing with rhythm is carried over into 20th century prose. All language is rhythmic, and this is a crucial statement for understanding the function of the fiction. The difference between the poet and the prose writer is that while for the poet, the rhythm imposes itself before he starts writing, the prose writer sees the rhythm growing in his hands like a craft. Ellen Hedstrand, Ellen Hedstrand rescues Henri Lefebvre's notion of rhythm analysis, understanding rhythm as intuitive and corporeal, creating a resistance to its comprehension in the commonly accepted intellectual path, because it would not be possible to conceptualize it. There is a paradox in the understanding of time and rhythm. It is cyclical by our demand for constant repetition, associating itself with nature. And it is linear through this presence in social life as a permanent one. Breaking an example from between the acts, we can locate this rhythmic dimension of the novel embodied in the element of modernity that is the gramophone used by Miss Latrobe. It is through this absence of the natural world emerges again from the suspension that occurred during the play. There is that passage something more than just the coordination of movements, reaching the coexistence in two rhythms that act in the fictional text, creating paths for scenes. There are atmospheres and social configurations. In the case of this episode that is Queen, the rhythm in the internal dialogue of the thoughts of different natures that pass through Isa, that bring attention to the aspects of pause and continuation in the text. According to Hedstrand, the greatest danger in the analysis of rhythm in prose is the danger of finding rhythm in everything and depleting the author's ability to manipulate these elements in the construction of poetic prose. Virginia Woolf aimed to place in your works, the sounds of everyday life, of perception, of the human body. In the short story Street Music, rhythm is the central theme, exploring the role of the listener and its influences in the psychological and physical aspects. By attributing to the artist's ability to produce sounds to something primitive, referring yourself to the ancient deity. Woolf reminds us of the Dionysian aspects of art has. The words and sentences flows in the minds of the characters in the book, in the except of the of the sounds. And by using isolated word, she creates a special basic emphasis on them, creating conjunctions that serve to balance the narrative. This is the separation of these specialists have. Sorry, I am putting Maria back. The separation of the homeotelto creates the poetic effect in writing, relying on the sound of sentences and the construction of rhymes. The polysydenton omits conjunctions, which slows down the sentence, or even with the excess of it. The effect is very similar in both cases. The reading gives the impression of excitation, also benefited by the use of the anaphor, that there is a repetition of phrases or set of words. Anaphora serves to link multiple sentences and sometimes paragraphs, which causes continuity in the flow of the images and thoughts in the narrative. The presence of rhythm as an articulation of techniques demonstrates how Woolf's writing has thought in the construction of scenarios and scenes that depended on numerous factors. And it is this sense that I think of rhythm as part of a construction of text cadence, or bringing part of the daily life into the text. The work of combining the forms is a step forward in Woolf's claim that the lyrical poetry produced by his contemporaries no longer acts with the same freedom before. This is an excess of the between the acts that caught my attention by the emphasis of and silence and sounds of nature, and how music is included in the narrative as part of the silence. Silence is part of the music and part of the text, part of the everyday life. Conventional prose is incapable of saying simple things. Sorry. So it would need that dose of enchantment and mystery with matter and rhythm, but always keep in mind the dosage of these two last components. They should smear the text in some spaces and not take all available corners of the narrative, being like waves that gradually arrive in the text, mixing experience and rhythm, a cohabitation between the cadence of poetry and the everyday. The point I wanted to emphasize is that the rhythm in between the acts is building on a crescent in the quest to establish a narrative of the dream of suspension. And it is the biggest difference between the work analyzed here and Woolf's previous works. By holding the reader in the waiting rhythm, Woolf brings attention to the small everyday events and how they themselves are a story to be told. In this sense, it is as if Mrs. Brown had achieved a novel of her own in the Between the Acts, a novel about the everyday, of everything. By making space for silence, Virginia Woolf strategically takes them as part of her everyday narrative, making it suspension and sound. The silence that precedes the events in Between the Acts brings with it an emotional charge that is based in the sounds of war and conflict and the rhythm of waiting that sets the tone for the entire text. Dispersed are we, and sorry for the English of the, sorry, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Anna. This was absolutely beautiful. I loved the way you kind of combined attention to the reader and attention, your very minute attention to the idea of like both slowing down and continuity and suspension, articulating the everyday with the gigantic event that war is. So well done. This was really beautiful. Thank you. Let's just
Thank you all for the patience.
That's a pleasure. Don't worry. No worries at all. Right, before we move on to Luca's paper, let's just have a minute or two to gather our thoughts. I very much agree with you, Paola. So don't worry, Anna. Everyone is perfectly happy with your presentation. I understand the stress, as I said, being a not being an English native speaker myself, it always is added stress. So I think it's all the more an achievement to be able to talk about your research and your work in your second language. So well done, you, in all respects. Right. So if everyone is happy to move on to Luca's paper, yes, you're here. Perfect. Right. Lucas is a graduate student at Federal University of Pernambuco. He is a member of Q, Kiklos of Woolfian Studies. He's a researcher in the field of literature and feminist criticism. He has experience in teaching English. He has also organized the book Prosa Poetica de Virginia Woolf, along with professors Maria Aparecida de Oliveira and Patricia Maruvo. Lately, he has been producing articles on Virginia Woolf's latest novel, Between the Acts, which is also the topic of his presentation, his research in the masters. So thank you very much, Luca, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Marie. I want to say first that for me, academia is always related to affection, and it's really good to be gathered in this room with people that are so lovely. And you really look like Annie Hathaway, Marie. And sometimes I look at you and I remember of Annie Hathaway, and it makes me feel so much better for presenting. Thank you for that. It's not really something you did it on purpose, but happening is helpful. And good morning, good afternoon. I don't know where you are, you all, but today I'm gonna present my paper. It's based on my dissertations, and the title is Whispers of Judith Shakespeare in Between the Acts, a study of Isabella Oliver's Shattered Silence. And I hope you're all feeling well. I'm Lucas. And besides everything mentioned on my bio, I forgot to add that I am passionate about Virginia Woolf. It's what has brought me here, what encouraged me to move forward, not only on the academic path, but also in life. I'm sure that all of you have a special bond with this woman as well. And for this, I'm already connected to all of you. And for the purpose of my presentation today, I will further analyze the characterization of Isabella Oliver in Between the Acts through the concept Virginia Woolf crafted when she created Judith Shakespeare on A Room of One's Own. One of the main contributions A Room of One's Own has brought to the feminist studies was the image of Judith Shakespeare, the invented sister of William Shakespeare, whom would be a metaphor for the unspoken poets. Judith represents the fury and agony of a writer when born in a woman's body in the 16th century, but more than that, her creation itself is an invitation to look back at the silenced mothers and sisters of literature. And this thread of thinking, of past woman is forged as a means of counteracting the phallogocentric thought. On Jacob's Room, Julia Hand, the entitled feminist, enters the British Museum and faces an enormous mind that is that place. She even refers to the keepers, those night watchmen flashing their lanterns over the backs of Plato and Shakespeare. And she complains about the lack of women forming this enormous mind. And she says, why didn't they leave room for an Eliot or a Bronte? She wonders. Julia's questions wouldn't hover only in Jacob's Room. For the 1929 essays, A Room of One's Own would also claim the literary field as belonging to women as well. Although Judith Shakespeare isn't the beginning of it all, the great mother, she represents this ghost of the women of Shakespeare's time. Virginia Woolf often wonders, what was it like to be a woman back then? And she means the experiences of them, but there are no records of such. In the end of the essay, Judith Shakespeare is brought back by the author as a symbol of hope, for when a woman writes, she thinks back through their mothers. And also, she keeps Judith Shakespeare's souls alive. Virginia Woolf would bring the metaphor of the silent poet, vivid only in their own mind, in many different ways. And for the purpose of this paper, we will focus on her last poet, Isabella Oliver. She is the wife of Giles Oliver, who is the son of Bartholomew, the owner of Point Hall, the place where the novel is settled. And her first appearance tells on her peculiar admiration over Rupert Haynes, one of the guests present in the room. Isa raised her head. The two words made two rings, perfect rings, that flew to them, herself and Haynes, like two swans downstream. But his snow-white breasts were circled with a tangle of a dirty duckweed, and she too, in her webbed feet, was entangled by her husband, the stockbroker. Sitting on her three-cornered chair, she swayed with her dark pigtails hanging, and her body like a poster in its faded dressing gown. This is the first description we have of Isa. And it's interesting how she is opposite to the man she appreciates. While she describes him with his snow white breast circled with a tangle of dirty duckweed, she herself is described with a faded dressing gown. This moment shows not only the erotic fever of Isa when hearing Mr. Haynes and describing him, but also the opposite coldness of her role as a wife who wasn't supposed to demonstrate this kind of affection towards another man. Not only she is a wife, but soon the reader finds out that she's has a kid as well. She's a mother. So by being able to actually read through Isa's thoughts, we can see how the feelings that make her human are silent by her social role as a woman, a wife, and a mother. Silence is very present on Isa's characterization. She often reads people on what they don't say as a mirror of her own unspoken poetry. And regarding Rupert Haynes, she says she had met him at a bazaar and at a tennis party. He had handed her a cup and a racket. That was all. But in his ravaged face, she always felt mystery. In his silence, passion. It is clear that she is aware that her impressions are not the reality, but considering her limitations, this is the only grasp of experience she can have, since she can directly talk with Rupert Haynes as she wants. As I had mentioned, those are Isa's first gleams on the novel. She hasn't spoken a word yet to other characters. She is staring at Mr. Haynes, remembering the mystery and the passion she recognized in him. But after this thought, precisely, she is interrupted by Mrs. Haynes herself, Rupert's wife. And she says, "Please, Mrs. Giles Oliver, do me the kindness to recognize my existence," which she was forced to do, rising at last from her chair in her faded dressing gown with the pigtails falling over each shoulder. The narrator is clear in establishing the actions of Isabella is forced to make. Also, the interruption of her thinking would appear once again when she was wondering about Mr. Haynes. This time, she was in her dressing room combing her hair. She is acknowledging not only a passion, but love. She thinks she's falling in love with Rupert. She is reading her own eyes in the mirror, and she starts to compose then the vibrations of the word love, which is echoing in her mind. And then she starts to think, where we know not, where we go not, neither know nor care, she hummed. Flying, rushing through the ambient, incandescent summer, silent, and the rhyme was air. But she put down her brush, she took up the telephone. 348 Pi Com, she says. Mrs. Oliver speaking. What fish have you this morning? Cod, halibut, sole, plaice? Once again, she is interrupted, being unable to actually finish the poem that was being forged. Although we are talking about the pre-Second World War period, Isabella resembles the image of the interrupted writer. Virginia Woolf calls upon this interruption to make suppositions. In Woman in Fiction, on why did the great female writers of the 19th century were novelists, she also points out to the interruptions. Orlando, protagonist of Woolf's novel, when turned into woman, also finds it difficult to write due to interruptions, and this shadow casted upon the paper mind of female writers could be described as the angel of the house, that according to Woolf, on her Professions for Women, women needs still to be slaughtered in order to write. The angel is a figure totally opposite to Judith Shakespeare. One is a spectre of an invented woman, the perfect model, restricted, and the other is the woman attempting the pen, which not only she has to break free of the phantom, but also when she writes, she murders it as well. On the specific scenario of Between the Acts, the interruption, the shadow, has a name, and it is Isabella's own husband. In a scene that follows her pursuit of a rhyme, when she has a stream of thought, the narrator speaks. The words weren't worth writing in the book, bound like an account book, in case Gaia suspected. Abortive was the word that expressed her, referring to Isa. Although it's shown by this description that Isabella looked exactly as she was, a woman who is a mother, a niece, and a daughter, and nothing more. It's interesting to note, and here I quote Melba Kubicane on the annotated version of Between the Acts, that Isaiah struggles with the problem of finding a voice in the wake of other voices, and their imperative authority may be the source of abortiveness. In her own efforts to write, and she is quoting now the novel, in the page 129, how I am burdened with what they drew from the earth, memories, possessions. That was the burden, she mused, laid on me in the cradle, what we must remember, what we would forget. So she knows she's being stuck and held down by tradition, but she also thinks she can't do much about it. So, however, and even though Isabella is blended in her own community, we soon realize she puts up with her restrictions in order to survive. She is not willingly part of the fantasy of the patriarchy. We can see an example of the silent writer when she is astonished by the news that reports a case of rape in the novel. Her attention is entirely driven to this fact, but the other men in the room aren't much bothered. The weather was a topic of much more speculation than this alleged violence against a woman. The main topic of Between the Acts is the pageant that Miss Latrobe builds, and the pageant is deconstructing the idea the patriarchy has on the history. So while appreciating the pageant that is always claiming dispersed are we, dispersed are we, Isabella starts to craft poems of her own, embracing a kind of emancipation. In one of the breaks between the acts, she comes up with some lines while she's putting her tea. And she's thinking, let me turn away from the array. She looked desolately round her, of china faces, glazed and hard, down the right that leads under the nut tree and the may tree, away, till I come to the wishing well, where the washerwoman's little boy, then she dropped sugar, 2 lumps, into her tea. Dropped a pin. He got his horse, so they say. But what wish should I drop into the well? She looked around. She could not see the man in grey, the gentleman farmer, nor anyone known to her. That the water should cover me, she added, of the wishing well. It's interesting how there is a mirror of her behavior and the lines she's singing to herself of dropping a pin and dropping the sugar in the tea in the wishing well. Although spontaneously she managed to form rhymes, she changes the meaning of the wishing well. She thinks that the wishes do not come from the wishing well, they fall in it. And there is also a similarity of another line that she composed earlier that day that I commented before when combing her hair. When she was rhyming, where we know not, where we go not, neither know nor care, flying, rushing through the ambient, incandescent, summer silent, and I added the air that she never could think of. So here she thinks of freedom through the unknown. But later that day, when the unknown seems too far, the summer silent air, she approached its a closer target, the wishing well. Although she hadn't gone there yet, for she says, they say, as if legends were told, there is a context in which she imagines a way to escape. Summer silent air will not fulfill her anymore. So she turns to the water of the wishing well, hope that the wishes that were dropped there would cover her and free her from herself. Finally, by analyzing the perspective of Isabella's in the narrative, we understand how her inner lyrism makes it possible for her to rewrite her own reality, resisting the commendation to adapt to the society. It's clear by the end of the novel that she and Gaius will argue. And I'm here quoting the novel. Before they slept, they must fight. After they had fought, they would embrace. From that embrace, another life might be born. But first, they must fight. As the dog fox fights with the vixen in the heart of darkness, in the fields of night. There is a comparison between them and the humans of ancient times, for one of the characters is reading about the prehistoric age. It's interesting how the narrator describes the night before the embrace. During conflicts, truths are said, and from reconciliation, another life will be brought. The 2 final sentences of the novel indicate this discussion with a forecast that they would embrace each other. In the end, the curtain rose. They spoke. They would speak, meaning the thoughts we could face from Isa would be now facing the surface of reality. Escaping the realm of her imagination, she will shatter her own silence. She will generate conflict, and by this, she will generate life. And this is my paper for you all today. Those are the works I was quoting during the presentation, and others I will further analyze in the complete article. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Lucas. This was really great, really interesting. I loved how you paired Isa and Judith Shakespeare. I had never thought of that myself, and I think this is a very productive pairing. And I loved your slide as well with the woman, like the silhouette of the woman with the interrogation mark on it. It's such a good, striking visual way to put it. So well done. So let's have another a minute or two for pause and reflection. Right, Carla, if you're ready, I can introduce you now.
Yes.
I keep losing the file where I put my notes. This is really bad. I don't know why it keeps closing. It's having a life of its own. Very annoying. And Carla, by the way, if you need to put your a copy of your paper in the chat, I haven't reminded you guys, Anna and Lucas, of this, but obviously if you wish to share your papers in the chat, please go ahead. Or even your PowerPoints for that matter, because I'm sure people would be interested. Right, okay. So Carla is a PhD candidate at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. She's currently working on a thesis entitled, very fittingly, Orts, Scraps, and Fragments Between the Acts and the Novel by Virginia Woolf, which aims to investigate the hybridity of literary forms in Virginia Woolf's last novel. Thank you for being with us today, Carla, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marie. And I want to thank you, especially Lucas, because sorry, he he invited me for this panel. So thank you, Lucas, for bringing us here together. Okay, I'll share my PowerPoint. Is it working? Yeah. Okay, then. So my presentation today is a work in progress because it is one of my chapters in my thesis. I thought by now it would be ready, but I mean, life. So, but I think it connects well with what Anna and Lucas have been saying. Okay, so I'll read because I get a little bit lost, but in August 1937, before beginning to sketch between the acts, Virginia Woolf asks herself, will another novel swim up? If so, how? The only hint I have is that it's to be dialogue and poetry and prose, all quite distinct. A few months later, as the concept of a new book starts to take shape, Woolf reflects on how she wants it to be random and tentative, and as usual, different from anything else she has ever done. And here we have the famous quote from her diary, explaining her ideas for the novel. And I want us to pay special attention to this part, what she says, but I rejected, we substituted, to whom at the end there shall be an invocation, we composed of many different things, we all life, all art, all waves and strays, a rambling capricious but somehow unified whole. Published after the author's death, Between the Acts is centered around the staging of a pageant, with scenes illustrating centuries of English history, from when it was a child newborn until the contemporary days of June 1939. Woolf was very much interested in bringing to her new book a prolific dialogue between prose fiction and theater. But apart from a novel that revisits and reconsiders the tradition of English theater, Between the Acts is also a narrative full of poetry, either with quotes and allusions or in verses created by a character. Poetry infiltrates the narrative of Between the Acts in many different ways and contributes to the fragmented structure of the novel, highlighting the relationship between literature and the community, as well as between literature and the individual. On the one hand, there is Isabella, as Lucas has showed brilliantly, a 39-year-old woman married to Giles Oliver, mother of 2 children, and who also happens to be a poet. Amidst the diversity of voices that compose this novel, Isa is one highly lyrical, always reflecting about her feelings and alluding to famous English poems. Gradually, we come to understand that she's deeply conflicted and uneasy. One of the reasons is because she's in love with another man, a local farmer named Hooper Haynes. Not to mention that her relationship with Giles is marked by a deep ambivalence, because she is both proud to be his wife, but also feels a lot of hate and resentment towards him. Throughout the novel, part of her thoughts revolves around her conflicted feelings for the two men. It is, for example, in a moment when she reflects about being in love with Haynes, that she starts humming a few verses while ordering fish. And then I'm not going to read it again because Lucas has read the passage where she orders fish. This is the first time in the novel that Isa is being creative or playful with language, but far from being a fulfilled poet, we learn that she feels compelled to hide her verses in an account book, especially so that Giles does not suspect of anything. Therefore, her poetic voice is kept secretive, and before her poetry can even begin to reach the paper, Isa has already chosen to abort her own verses. In this sense, although poetry flows naturally from her, it does not find a vessel. Her voice is silent and does not communicate anything to the world around her. Incapable of externalizing her sadness and restlessness, she feels imprisoned in the present and hopeless about the future. In this sense, Isa resembles a bird trapped in a cage, but as opposed to all the birds constantly singing and tweeting throughout the narrative, she's one whose chanting cannot be heard. Furthermore, regardless of all the allusions to past literature present in this character's voice, such as Keats, Shelley, or Swinburne, when it comes to the literary tradition, Isa does not seem to find comfort for her troubles anywhere in it. Standing before Point Sol's library, she reflects on what a remedy was there for her at her age. Book shy she was, like the rest of her generation, and gun shy too. Hence, there is a sense in Isa's voice that past literature is insufficient to remedy her pain and cannot help understanding the troubles of her generation. She would rather read the newspaper than anything in the library. In some ways, Isa represents the situation of a writer during a period of so much conflict and fear as the one preceding the Second World War. In times when reality is too strong and things change every day, it is natural that people would want to keep up with the recent news, following either through newspapers or radio broadcasts. As suggested by the game, Woolf herself often questioned the value of literature during this period, since it presented no practical solution to end the war. In her last years, Woolf found it difficult to read long novels or write for long periods of time, because there was always a distraction. With the whole Europe in flames, she observes, how meaningless, and here I quote, like a moth dancing over a bonfire consumed in less than 1 second, her book might be amid everything happening. Isabella then illustrates this ambivalent feeling towards literature a writer could feel during a time of conflict. Let me take a pause here. Isa's conflict word also demonstrates that the matter of women in fiction discussed by Woolf years earlier in A Room of One's Own remains as problematic as ever, especially if that woman writes poetry, as the narrative exposes how women are still not encouraged to be artists, antagonized by 2 generations of men, Bart and Giles, and overwhelmed by a male literary tradition. Isa cannot be blamed for not experiencing her full potential as a poet, because that's what she learned the angel of the house should do. In this sense, Woolf's words about Judith, the fictitious Shakespeare sister, in A Room of One's Own, sadly still could describe a woman of the end of the 1930s. And here I quote, that woman, then, who was born with a gift of poetry in the 16th century, was an unhappy woman, a woman at strife against herself. All the conditions of her life, all her own instincts were hostile to the state of mind which is needed to set free whatever is in the brain. With Isa, the spirit of Judith, who lives in all women, still hasn't found its way to become a great writer. Crushed by the patriarchy and the uncertainty of what will become of civilization, her talent remains silent and unexplored to its full potential. Isabella is the figure of the lyrical poet par excellence, who suffers and channels in her verses the darkness and weight of her times. As Adorno discusses in his own lyric, Poetry and Society, to talk about poetry is to talk about what goes on in society. Here I quote Adorno: only one who hears the voice of humankind in the poem Solitude can understand what the poem is saying. Sorry, I forgot to put this, this quote in my slide. In this sense, Isabella's voice channels the subterranean substrate of pain and doubtfulness, which deep down everyone in the community is feeling because of the possibility of the war. However, far from being a simple vessel for the community as a poetess representation, she's also a woman facing her own contradictions. Thus, Isabella Oliver's representation evokes in the novel the expected complexity from a woman with a poetic sensibility, trying to navigate a patriarchal and imperialist society at the verge of the Second World War. However, as Woolf herself wrote, this novel was not supposed to be about an I, but about a we. Isabella's lyrical vein is just a part of all the orts, scraps, and fragments that constitute the communal voice of this narrative. In terms of poetry, I would like to suggest that this means that in her search for expressing the life of this group of people in a small English village, Woolf went back to the origins, or rather relied on primitive aspects to emphasize the anonymous and collective aspect of it. In his study about the origins of poetic forms, Brazilian scholar Segismundo Spina explains that, primitive poetry is not exclusively the poetry of pre-literate peoples, but poetry that is linked to singing, undifferentiated, anonymous, and collective. It is poetry in its ancillary stage, that is, subordinated to music and sometimes to choreography. Spina also highlights that when it comes to the formal phenomenon of primitive poetry, there is usually an analogy in the complex of literary manifestations of all groups, peoples, or communities, regardless of their age or their historical experience. In general, the formal phenomena that preside over the birth and initial development of poetry and were always resources and expedients of poetic elaboration are repetition, the chorus, parallelism, alliteration, rhyme, and anacrusis. However, Spina reinforces that democratic poetry and collective creation does not really exist. In fact, primitive poetry has a collective character because it represents the aspirations of the collectivity and is closely linked to the modus vivendi of these communities. But its poetic achievement ends up being attributed always to a tête poétique. Consequently, poetry is only collective in the sense that whether we know the person of the poet or not, it expresses the feelings of collectivity and not of the poet's individuality. While reviewing between the acts, Woolf started an unfinished project of a common history book that could represent the history of literature as a continuum. The first chapter, entitled Anon, contrasts the communal aspect of literature with the isolation of the author figure that emerged in Renaissance. In Anon, then the history of literature begins with an idyllic image of Great Britain as an island in which an untamed forest reigned full of birds singing. Then humans came, heard the birds singing, and started to sing too. Woolf, therefore, imaginatively traces the origins of English literature to the inspiration an anonymous poet, Anon, got from birds singing in the woods. And here I quote, "The voice that broke the silence of the forest was the voice of Anon." Also, in In this essay or this chapter, Woolf claims that the poet's singularity was not important, since Anon's song was about everybody's shared emotion, in the sense that the poet was just a singer responsible for expressing the community's experience. In between the acts, just like Anon, Woolf's impersonal and non-authoritarian narrator brings together different voices to create a single work of art. As suggested by Cuddy King, this is a novel in which voices and words create patterns, echoes and repetitions that in turn produce a rhythm. In opposition to the recurrent images of silence and emptiness, the voices of the characters are mixed with the excerpts of poems and songs, the sound of the gramophone, and the sounds of nature itself, creating a common voice made up from different fragments. As in the untamed forest of Anon, human life comes to perceive the world that surrounds it and try to give it some meaning through words. And here I want to show a passage just to exemplify a little bit of what I mean. This is a scene about the dining room, points out dining room. And I'm gonna read them. The room was empty, 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 empty. Silent, silent, silent. The room was a shell, singing of what was before time was. A vase stood in the heart of the house, alabaster, smooth, cold, holding the distilled essence of emptiness, silence. Across the hall, a door opened. One voice, another voice, a third voice came wimpling and warbling. Gruff, Bart's voice. Quavering, Lucy's voice. Middle-toned, Isa's voice. Their voices impetuously, impatiently, protestingly came across the hall, saying, "The train's late," saying, "Keep it hot," saying, "We won't, no Candice, we won't wait." To create the image of an uninhabited dining room, Woolf does not merely describe it, but also produces the sensation of emptiness and silence. The repetition of the words empty and silent cut the fluidity of prose, because before that we have a long description about the room. Both words start with a heavy stress and ends with a light one, creating a pattern of repetition of trochees in this case. In her analysis of metrical verse, poet Mary Oliver explains that when a line is trochaic, the effect is formal or even artificial. This is because iambic meter is the one that resembles more the cadence of natural speech. Even though this is not a poem, Woolf's choice of words and repetition then produces the effect of a dramatic pause in the fluidity of the text, calling even more attention to those two words. Then, following the poetic passage, at the end of the first paragraph there, comes a long pause between the end of one scene and the beginning of the next, leaving the reader some room to contemplate the emptiness and silence before all the voices come to agitate the room. When answering John Lemon's question if she thought poetry was dead, Woolf says in a letter to a young poet that only if the poet is trying to fit in the norms of the past. To survive, poetry must find new ways of expression and new subjects. In this essay, Woolf also discusses how poetry is all about rhythm. And here, and here I quote her. The most profound and primitive of instincts in her words. And in order to write good poetry, all one needs is to stand at the window and let your rhythmical sense open and shut, boldly and freely, until one thing melts in another, until the texts are dancing with the daffodils, until a whole has been made from all these separate fragments. The task of the modern poet is to create a harmonious whole between things that seem incompatible, in a saturate, condensed, and synthesized way. Finally, as Copley has demonstrated, Between the Acts can be seen as an elegy for lyric poetry. That is, to the idea of poetry subordinated to a set of rules written mostly by a male tradition. I would like to think that the novel includes lyric poetry, or this lyrical eye, Isabella, as one of the many different things that compose modern life, showing how life has more of a natural jazzy rhythm. Everything is empty of meaning, and then comes our lives, our sounds, our words, to try to give some sense to it. And the sense between the acts is like an immense cauldron, filled with pieces of past and present lives, and everything that comes with it, all the joy, all the sadness, all the uncertainty, sorry guys, of what will happen with civilization in the next few months. It is a novel about the natural rhythm of life that asks what comes next for women writers, what comes next for poetry, for literature, and for civilization. It is language simmering, waiting to unveil new paths. Thank you.
Well done, Carla. This was really beautiful. Yeah, it's amazing. We have a bit under 30 minutes for a question, but whilst people just gather their thoughts and think about how to put their questions, I just wanted to say I really am pleased with this kind of thing that we have come full circle back to the idea of rhythm, and that's just that's so beautiful. Your papers tie in just perfectly with one another. This is amazing. I love what you've done with this idea of like about Isa, Carla, when you said that poetry is floating freely in her, but that, you know, it's not, it's completely the opposite with her voice. And I found that it's a very good way to put it. The idea that the primitive poetry and anonymity are entangled, it's absolutely perfect. I have a favor to ask. If you wouldn't mind sharing this Pinot reference in the chat, that would be great, because that was a really good quote that you used. Yeah, and the idea of between the acts as an immense cauldron, I'm absolutely in love with that idea. Everything that has a witch reference to it when it comes to Woolf, I'm a big fan. I'm sorry, Kelly, that you missed the beginning of the panel. I'm so sorry about it. I mean, it's a good thing that everything is being recorded, so don't worry. This is not everything is lost. So I'm so sorry. It happened to me as well in the past. It's really frustrating. But yeah, thank you all again for your papers. I love the constellations that you drew between Isa, Judith, you know, Mrs. Brown is just, it's really great. And your attention and your love almost to the characters that you're talking about, it's really good. So if people have any questions, just feel free to unmute and ask your question, because to be honest, we're blessed with a quite confidential room, a Zoom room. So yes, Rachel, go ahead.
Hello, gosh, thank you all so much. That was just so wonderful. And I think I always feel like the best thing you can say about conference papers or a panel is that they make you want to go back and read the book again. So thank you, I so want to read the book again. I'll just warn you now, I do have a baby in the room who might want to join in. Yes, thank you. And also I just feel, I'm so excited by your ideas that this is all going to come out as a bit of a blah, 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 blah. So bear with me. I was really struck, Lucas, when you were introducing your paper right near the beginning, you were talking about Isa as wife of Giles, as daughter-in-law of Bartholomew. And it is a while since I've read the novel, but remind me, do we know anything about Isa's own background? Because I think that would be really interesting in terms of what you're talking about with A Room of One's Own and the link to Judith Shakespeare there, and that kind of idea of thinking back through our mothers. I don't think we know who Isa's mother is. And then sort of from that got me wondering about where Lucy Swithin might fit in here. And is there a sense in which she's maybe what Isa might become, or is she, I know she isn't Isa's mother biologically, but is there a sense in which there's a link there? I don't know, I'm kind of bubbling over with ideas, so I'll sort of throw that at you and see what you want to make of it. Thank you so much.
Oh no, thank you, Rachel. And I love kids, so I just think it's lovely, all the noises and ideas that kids have. We just can't understand, but they are expressing themselves somehow. And yes, we know close to nothing about Isa as a person. We only know that she's in love. We know the things she can do, but that goes for all the characters that are at the borders of that community as well. Latrobe, William Dodge, Lucy Swift, and all of them, we know little about them because I think that the critique actually, they are the Mrs. Brown that society does not want to grasp. They do not care about them. But we as readers, we can read into their thoughts. So we know them by what bothers them, by what are they neglected about. So I think that's how we get to know Isabella Oliver as the unspoken poet. And you asked about Lucy. Yes, there is a connection between all these characters that diverge. For example, Lucy is the only one that acknowledges William Dodge at first, and he's really touched by that. And then William meets Isa right after. So there is this connection between the characters. And at the scene I mentioned that Isa is reading about the rape, there is a comment on the newspaper that the lady that was attacked, she had a hammer and Lucy's passing with a hammer. So there is this connection that is unspoken, as everything is unspoken on the novel, because the novel is about the silence that is not the silence here is a consequence. They do not choose to be silenced, but it's through the silence that they can subvert somehow. So yes, Between the X is a very complex novel when talking about, because there is no plot, as Isa says herself, there is no plot, but many things that hover on minds when reading. And I hope I could answer or enlighten you somehow about your question. And I really hope that you do read again Between the Acts and talk to me about it, because I love to talk about this novel.
Just to jump in quickly, sorry, Anna.
No, go ahead,
I think she has Irish heritage. If I'm not mistaken, there is a part of the novel that said that. But I think that's the idea, not to give like as if it doesn't mean for this context or for this society to know where she comes from. She's just Giles' wife, right? There is the scene, I think we can compare about the pictures in Poinsettia's room. And then we have the picture of a man who was someone like part of the family, and they know who he is, and they have a lot to say about the man in the picture. And then there is another picture about a woman, and she's there just because she's beautiful. No one knows anything about her. So yeah.
Also, we know that Virginia Woolf is a great reader of the Victorian age, and there are many influences. And when I read about Isabella Oliver, I can stop to think about Dorothea Brooke from Middlemarch, because the idea of unvisited tombs is clear on Virginia Woolf novels. She's talking about these characters that they have no impact on history, but they impact us readers somehow. They move us. So I think that is a very good idea to think about too. Like, those characters, they are invisible to their society. So the act of subverting is actually giving them some stream of conscience somehow.
Anna, go ahead.
I put my question in the chat, but I want to complete her. Lucas, you see in the Between the Acts a reminiscence of the Greek myths, because I listened to the panel of Paola, and she talks about Dionysian reading to the lighthouse. And after she speak about it, I was thinking about the myth of Daphne in between the acts. You just see that, oh, just a crazy idea in my mind.
I never stopped to think about that, which is a great opportunity now to do so. But every time I think of Daphne, I think of resistance. I think it's a great image of how far has a woman to go to say no to a man. She's being chased, and then she's turned into this tree, and the statue that made her eternal is she like being like almost crystallized when afraid of Apollo. So we could say that Isa is being chased during the novel with these interruptions as she's trying to evolve to move forward, but there is this patriarchy atmosphere that Virginia Woolf talks about in Three Guineas that pulls her back to that reality. So we could say that she could be, in attempting to say no, being petrified there in Point Hall, because we don't get to see much. The end of the novel, the curtain rose, they spoke, but we never know what came after, and it's on us actually now. I could say yes, I would have to study a little bit more and read out all what other people think of Virginia Woolf's relations with Daphne, but I would go to this like stream of thread of thinking, I suppose.
And I will say again, thank you for making me return to Between the Acts. Lucas have contacted me and Carla to set this panel for a beautiful experience I was living in these 4 days. So thank you.
Anna, if I may, I had a question for you. That was all right. I was just really struck. I just didn't remember that passage of Between the Acts that has the mention of like a premonitory sound or a word. I think in one of the quotes you used there was this idea of premonition, and I was really interested in what you think is the relation between this kind of premonition and the primitive, because it's in one single quote, and I don't know, I wondered, I have like literally no idea, but how would you see that connection if you had to speak a bit more to that?
Yes, I think about it. The permanence in the text is the aspect of the nature and the sounds of the nature caught my attention. The passage of the cow cough. And this sounds at the cow is a part of the book. It's absolutely pleasant. And this, as the changes of the sounds are characterized by the dots, the commas, commas é uma palavra em inglês, I think. The commas in the text, the pauses, that the silence enter the book to reinforce the permanence of the human and the nature as opposites. And I think Ellen Redstrand, there is the theorist that I use it, speaks overwhelming about this form of uses the language and uses how Woolf uses these elements of language to play a part in the book. And rhythm come to my attention the form as she speaks loud the text. In one of the diaries she made these notes. And this book especially, I think it's a book to be read out loud. Yes. It's necessary read them out loud, because he was alteration the written the book, the sounds, the voices, the impulses of movement. And in this point, I remember the presentation of Eret that mentioned the wonder in the to the lighthouse. It connects beautifully with the idea in the between the acts. The book is a wonder, as a wonder and wandering along the book. And there's this idea of permanence and movement, the pauses and rhythm, the sounds, the music, and the cow. The cow is a person perfect. She played perfect in the play, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anna. Some beautiful thoughts there, really.
I don't know if I answer your question, but
I think you have. Yeah, I think you have. I was asking because I worked on Between the Acts in one of my chapters, and I was really interested in this kind of articulation between the primitive and the machine, right? Because it's so interesting to see how nature kind of conspires with the gramophone to kind of reveal something about human nature. And I just thought that Woolf's articulation of nature and like technology was so interesting, and the idea of premonition as well, and the fact that, you know, it's a primitive, but I mean, at one point I just got stuck on this idea of the primitive, and I just had this question in my head: is the primitive quintessentially past? But it's not past. It's kind of a temporality is something that it's always going on almost.
Like a suspension. The gramophone is the tone that sets the play, and when he broke his silence, the Narrator appears again. It is modernity and primitive will play all along the book. But I think who wants the fight of primitive and modernity is a primitive, as the speak of Lucas at the final paragraph of the book. The primitive wants. The primitive is the premonition.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for all the panelists. It was really nice, and I really love Between the Acts. I think it's a wonderful novel. It's so playful, and I think Anna actually used the word or the idea that this kind of play with rhythm and silence and sound is there to add this element of enchantment. I think yeah. So I like that, and I think it's related to my interest in wonder and also enchantment. And I'm thinking about the combination, or like as you said earlier as well, that there's this whole novel is so much about wondering, and she's so happy to do it. Like she's taking full pleasure of it. Like I think there's so much pleasure in this novel. I think this kind of like sensations, despite the fact that there's this horrible war looming not too far from England, right? And like what it means for the whole of not just humanity, but you know, all the cows that are there in the novel, and birds and everything like that. I don't think I have like a proper question. I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed it. And if it's like a question or a point of discussion, it's maybe this kind of tension between kind of human history or history that kind of revolves around the idea of progress and, you know, nations and so on. And then this prehistory that Lucy Swithin is kind of thinking about. Like maybe how do these two things overlap, or maybe how the point in history that the characters are at and like think about when the present moment bit in the pageant appears, how this, despite, as I said, the fact that there's this war, it allows to think about this enchantment as well, because it's like, I don't know, I feel like that she wants to draw our attention to the fact that despite the fact that there are these horrible things, there's still this element of this, I don't know, maybe something that Marie was referring to as this primitivism or prehistory, all these things. But I don't think that there's a real question in my comment.
It's all right. We can wander and wander as well. We can just, you know, walk the walk together. That's fine.
I don't know. I mean, Lucy is all about wandering, right? And she's such a beautiful character. I don't even know where to include her in my chapters because it's something so different and so beautiful. But I think she and Isa can be seen as two sides of a coin. I don't know because there's also the references to birds in this novel, and then we have the swallow and the nightingale. Like they have very different approaches to what's happening, and maybe she's more like the swallow, like she's waiting for what comes next, for spring to come, and then things settle down again. I don't know. I feel like she's more optimist than Isa. I don't know. I was just thinking about the two characters because go ahead, Davi. Do you have a comment or a question? Sorry.
No, well, it's more of a rambling. Well, first of all, I just want to say that it's such a pleasure to see Brazil represented this way here. Wonderful to see these Brazilian readings, Lucas, Ana, and Carla. And I was wondering about what Marie said and your answers, thinking about rhythm and this cacophony that is produced in silence, right, in between the machine and the animals and the natural world. And of course, I mean, a lot has been written about this, right, about the role of the artist as some sort of architecture of sound, thinking of Miss Latrobe. And I wanted to ask you about this, especially as you're thinking about genre, like, to which extent is this cacophony a symbol of the success or the failure of the pageant or of the novel? So I wanted to ask you about this, perhaps. I was thinking, because of Ana Carolina, I found it amazing that you started with this idea by Luis Costa Lima, Brazilian theorist, right, of non-imitative mimesis. So perhaps there's something there that could contribute to this discussion of the failure or the success of the novel pageant, right?
That's an amazing question. Thank you, Davi. Right, who wants to start to deal with a difficult question?
Oh, I brought the idea of Luis Costa Lima. He was my I don't know the word to orientador.
Your supervisor, he was.
My supervisor, my doctoral, and I use this mimesis no imitative to accept how Virginia Woolf creates a world, and in his books, each book is a complete universe, and this universe is constructed by the images, symbols, and rhythm. Because when we compare Night and Day and Between the Acts, the rhythm is opposes. I complete oppose ideas. And in this case, genre occupies the space of creation. The creation of the symbols that she mobilizes are characteristically females. Each female are a symbol, are a deity, if you can choose this word. And when the play is on in Between the Acts, this woman that was the cooker, was persons of the community, enter in another space, a space of focality. They are the total attention of the people, and they play something that they want to be. In some cases, she puts hers in another space, in another possibility of creation. Each woman that was a new creation, a creation that in some way could be traced or could be prolonged in her life some way. The creation of the personality of each other. I don't know if I answer your question, David, but I think that what Woolf brings to coming to the play is be the opportunity to demonstrate that each woman is a deity that play with the quotidian, play with the idea, the primitive and the modernity in herself, I think. I don't know if I go too far, but I'm gonna draw the question for Carla and Lucas too. I don't want to suffer alone.
Yeah, I love the question, especially because I was reading your. I've been reading that article for a while now that you contribute on the book A Prosa Poética de Virginia Woolf, along with another author, Davi, and about Ellen Sixu and Virginia Woolf. And I think that Latrobe, she disrupts language, as Sixu would in the future theorize about the archetype feminine. She breaks, she destroys, she tries to foresee. She is making the society question themselves. There is a moment in the pageant that the actors hold mirrors and the audience see themselves and they do not understand a thing that is happening. And I think that when you ask us if the cacophony is like did the pageant, did the novel was a success or failure, we don't know, because Virginia Woolf is writing reality, and it's easy to read the past because the past already happened. You can see what lacks, you can see what emphasizes, but in the present, we cannot understand. That's why we have birds and airplanes. That's why we have a gramophone and counts. That's why we have people complaining in the audience and the actors singing in the stage. We don't know who's gonna win. We don't know what will happen. And the play is not a success, it's not a failure because it is uncertain. It's reality. It's England during the war. There are sides to be chosen, but no one there, including Woolf herself, her narrator, Anna, they cannot predict the future. They can read the present, and the present is a mess. So I think that's what reflects a lot in the pageant, in the novel.
I love your thinking there, Lucas. It makes sense the way, yeah, because it's reality. It's neither failure or success. It's ongoing always. I love that.
Yeah.
Anna, go ahead.
I think it depends on the way we see it, yeah. But for Miss Latrobe, I think for sure it was a failure in her view, because I think it's also a sort of a critique, maybe from Woolf, that she's trying to be this author that controls her writing, and because she wants everyone to see her vision, and she has trouble in letting go of her creation and giving space to life to come in between what she's writing. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, in the book, I think the pageant is a success, but for Miss Latrobe, no, yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking. It's such a good question.
Miss Latrobe is very. We need to see Miss Latrobe with more attention. She's a character that deserves more attention, I think.
Yeah. We are just at our time, but I would really like to hear Maya's question, and I think we would all be frustrated if this was the end of the conversation. So Maya, go ahead. I guess we can have a bit more, a few more minutes, obviously.
Thank you, Mahi. It's not a question, it's just to say that I am very proud of you guys. I suggested Lucas to invite Carla and Anna, and then the papers, they fitted so well, and they both, all of you talking about silence and about poetry, and it was perfectly fitted. So it's not a question, just to think about the way, because I discussed this with Lucas, the way the poetry of T.S. Eliot is embedded in the novel. So it's not a question, but just to see if you have analyzed the wasteland and between the acts. Just that. Thank you so much. I'm very proud of you.
Virginia Woolf would hate me for that, but yes, I did. It was like a very switch on my reading of Between the Acts when I read along with T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Sorry, Virginia Woolf. I know you hate to be compared, but it became like not a compliment, but it was good to use as a tool of furthering analyzing Between the Acts, and also see how the female, the androgynous soul of Virginia Woolf narrators diverges somehow of T.S. Eliot's voice in the poem. So yes, I did, and it was nice. I started to writing a paper for it, for my a discipline that I took on my post-graduation. But so yes, Maria, I did, and it was really good to see the comparisons between them.
I want to thank you a little bit to Davi and Maria. I'm a historian. I'm not from the studies of language. And they welcome me in your classes and teach me so much, still teaching me always. And thank you. I want to thank you them.
I have to say, everyone, there is so much love in this chat, in this room today, in this virtual room. It is making my day, and I'm thanking you, really, because it's what we miss from face-to-face conferences, and the love that you are extending to one another, to your supervisors, to your colleagues, to the attendees, even to the characters of the novels you're talking about. It's absolutely, it gives us hope, and the way you read Between the Acts is so hopeful in its nuance. So well done for that again, really. Thank you guys for everything, and you made me think about the novels in obviously different ways, so it was an absolute pleasure for me to chair this panel. If people have ultimate thoughts, questions, we can maybe take a few more minutes. We can also stop the recording there and have a chat before people go on their breaks, because there is a long break scheduled now for about an hour. So if people want to, chat a bit more freely, that's also an option. I'm happy either way. We can also just go rest our brains. It's fine. Oh, that's lovely to hear, Susan. Susan says, Between the Acts has interested me in the past, but has never been a special Woolf novel. This may now change. Thank you, Susan. It's that shows you how good the papers are when they make you see things differently.
I just want to say that this is pretty new, I think, in Brazil too, because we have a few studies about this novel, but the interest is very recent in this novel. So there is, I think, one thesis about it, and then another dissertation, but one or two articles, and now there are more people studying it. So it's really special to share the interest in this novel, because it hasn't been having much attention in Brazil, and I think it could bring so much light to other novels that we study a lot in Brazil. So yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, and I love it because it shows this sort of like the more kind of, I don't know, lively and affirmative and playful side of Woolf as well. I think this is one of the reasons. And it brings together, I don't know, so much of what she does maybe into the Lighthouse, which is kind of this more poetic and like at least at the first glance, more maybe, I don't know, nostalgic or sad or something like this. And then something from Orlando, right? I feel like in between the acts you have all of that, like all sides of her. So this is why it's so wonderful for me as well.
Yes, thanks for
Can I-
that.
Can I just, oh,
Yeah.
sorry, if this is like just chat, I wonder if you read Mark Hussey's edition of Between the Acts for Cambridge, because he removed the italics, and it's a completely new experience of reading the novel, because the pageant is truly integrated with the narration. And I found it, the last time I taught the novel, it was because I wanted to study Mark Hussey's edition. so I found it amazing, the fact that, I mean, when you publish the text as Virginia Woolf finally wrote it, right, had it, I mean, the novel changes. The pageant is completely integrated with the text, right?
That's amazing. I had no idea.
Kelly.
So are you talking about this version that has his annotations in the back, or is this something different?
This one,
Yours
oh,
has
the
different
one,
color.
the one Carla has there.
It's this one.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll have to look for that. And I wanted to say too, that I'm really excited to hear that clearly these papers had a more like positive sense of emotional reaction between the acts, because I've always felt that way about the novel too. And I know that not everybody does, right? I mean, clearly in the panel yesterday, I was talked about how mean the people are to each other. And that is absolutely there too. But for me, there's these competing things that you're talking about, the sensory, the detail, the ambiguity of the future. And so I'm also just like, oh, I miss talking. This was gonna be so great. You have no idea how disappointed I am. I feel like I've just missed the best panel of the conference, but don't worry, like you will hear, I am just gutted. All the other days I started at the beginning of the day. So once I got on at the right time, everything else, fit. Today was the day I needed to take a morning off. And so I had down the wrong time to join. You have no idea how really honestly, genuinely gutted I am to not be able to talk about Between the Acts with other people who love this novel. But yeah, you'll hear from me.
Write to us. You can write to us. We put our emails in the chat. Write to us.
I will.
And hopefully there will be other chances.
Yes.
Now I will be lesser afraid to talk English, and will be better.
That's wonderful to hear, Anna. That's the best outcome. And you should definitely not be scared. It's all good. Great. So maybe now would be a good time to wrap up and go have a break, long break. Yes, enjoy your breaks, everyone. Thanks again for this wonderful session. And yeah, I'm just going to clap again. Well done.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Paola. Thank you all for listening to us.
Yeah, let's
thank you, Eric. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a lovely end of your conference.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, and I just wanted to say that I saved the chat, so if anybody wants to revisit the conversation, they can.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Paola.
Thank you, Paola.
I've tried to send my slides, but I don't know why it's not working. So if anyone wants it, email me and then I'll send. Okay.
That's cool. Thanks, Carla. Bye, everyone.